something like this.
Hey everybody, Rhett Weddell coming at you from the book launch for Carlos Francisco, good friend of mine. His new book is being released today. So you think you want to get into corporate security. Carlos and I have known each other for about 5 years. I was very privileged when he reached out and asked if I, along with some of his other really good friends, could help facilitate this book launch today. So to get started, I'm telling you, I had a chance to review this book before it was released, giving me a chance to get prepared for today. My background is I'm wearing my military police shirt, right? I was a U.S. Army military policeman for about 23 years. I thought I had a really good exit strategy. I'd been home for about 23, 24 months and was getting ready to go back to another short or long tour. So I came up with my exit strategy. And had I had this book, I would have not made 4 critical errors, right? I would have networked a little better. I would have had an exit plan of 1 to 2 years out. I would have done a whole lot more networking. When I get an idea, I don't know if the rest of you fellas are the same way. I sold that idea to my wife as it was a plan. It wasn't a plan. It was an idea. And so before we get too much further into it, this book would have helped me, a former uniformed soldier. And then, I got into some contract guard force work. Another buddy of ours is going to join here in about 10 seconds. His name is Greg Bowman. He came from the law enforcement community. And let's bring Greg on and see what he's got to say. Hey, Greg, how you doing, buddy?
Rhett, what's going on, my friend? How are you?
What a great day to help launch a book for a super fella that's a mentor to all. How are you?
I am great. I'm happy to be here. I'm honored that our buddy Carlos selected, hopefully wisely, you and I to help kick this off and celebrate what is a tremendous accomplishment for him.
Yeah. So one of the things I led in with is, why does this book matter? Right? It mattered to me, or it would have mattered if I'd have had it. How about your transition and when you went from one extremely impressive career to the next?
Yeah, I wish this book would have been around when I made my jump. Similar to you, but on the law enforcement side, I did a little over 20 years in city government with my terminal rank as chief of police, part-time city manager mixed in there. And when I decided to leave that and try to figure out what chapter 2 looked like when I want to, what I want to be when I grow up, I didn't know what was out there and really struggled through the transition. Something like this, a book like this that lays out a great framework that's an easy read to kind of help outline the challenges and thoughts and what to go through would have been fantastic for me. I was fortunate that I got to work with you and Carlos at a former place and have you both to bounce ideas off of and thoughts and really help make that transition much smoother than it could have been, obviously.
Hey, so that's a super point. Some things happen by accident, some things are planned, but I think we need to bring the man out himself. Hey, Carlos, why don't you come on center stage and talk about your great book?
What is up, everybody? Good to see you.
Congratulations, Carlos.
Man, the myth, the legend. There he is.
Here's the book. I got the book here, and it's really exciting. And I think we have the link up for anybody, the QR code, if anybody just want to click right on it and go right to the site where to get it. But yeah, I am so happy that you guys are here and you're helping me out with this process. I was freaking out in the back. I've been sweating like crazy to the point that I had to take my jacket off because it's such an awesome moment for 11-year-old from Brazil that came to the U.S. not knowing any English whatsoever to be able to write a book. This is really exciting, gents. Thank you very much for hosting it with me or for me or with.
I think anybody that knows you, right, and I'm assuming that they're coming not to see Greg and I, they're coming because of your background in podcasting and in being a mentor and in being on LinkedIn and being an ASIS CPP warrior. One thought as we go into you talking about your book, I was doing some reading earlier and it validated what I knew, and that is relocation, job transition, career change, retirement. You lump those things together, they are fourth in the stress levels that human beings are facing every day before the pandemic, right? Probably
Yeah.
raised now. So I think this book is going to help people. It's going to put people at ease. But, Greg and I were talking before you came on. Why write a book, right? Isn't that putting yourself out there?
Well, and hey, Rhett, before we get into that, let's not just say write a book. Let's talk about the #1 new release on Amazon.
What?
So you want to get into corporate security. The number 12 Amazon book in the business facility management category. The number 20 book in the world, mind you, for business production and operations. So this isn't just any book. This is the book, the manual to have in your hand as you're doing these things.
Yeah, very impressive.
And for our guests listening at home, as Carlos gets into that, we can see your comments as they're popping up. So feel free to drop them in there. If there's questions, we'll try to get to them and include some folks later on. Carlos, tell us, man, how'd you get here?
How did I get here? It was on a plane. Actually, I got on a plane in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and I moved to the U.S. now. It's really interesting stuff, guys, because I don't think I went out to write a book. Like, my idea in the beginning wasn't to write a book. I had a tremendous love, and I give thanks. If you guys go to page number 3 in the book, right away on the dedicated, I dedicated to a few folks that have been in my life that served in the military or law enforcement, along with my family and some others. But it's to give back to those folks that have given so much of their life to me. I'm a huge patriot of the United States. Everybody knows I spent a couple of years as a law enforcement officer. So how do I do that? How do I give back? So I didn't set out to write a book. I set out to just, hey, anybody that wants to talk to me on how to get into corporate security, let me help. I want to help. If you have any questions, let me know. And what happened slowly, I started putting together kind of an idea of, maybe this could be a book, but it was all to give back to the great military, law enforcement, emergency services, and federal folks that were out there just trying to make that transition. Because you guys, that in today's world, you can't just have one career anymore. I mean, you can do 20, 25 years in the military, law enforcement. In today's world, it's not enough to just retire a lot of times, and you have to continue on. How do I make that easier for you? And kind of that's where it started. And then in the back of the book, which is really cool, and I'll read this part, it says, I want to diminish that little feeling that tells you it will be too hard to translate what you knew and experienced in the military, law enforcement, and federal service into a career in the corporate world. And that's really what I set out to do with this book. So, yeah, man.
I think you hit it out of the park.
Oh, well, thank you. I like home runs. So does my little kid, Jax. He's really into hitting baseballs right now. So
he's a good dude. So why don't you peel back the curtain and let's talk about a couple of things, right? Greg and I were both, being a little vulnerable. We were talking about transitioning and maybe not having the master plan. I know I'll jump right to the end of your book. You've got some great takeaways about, how to get yourself ready, right? What to do. The thing that I found, and Greg and I were talking about it yesterday, is you don't have to read this book cover to cover, right? You don't have to go forward to end. If you're in a position right now where you are narrowing it down to what you think you want to do, go to that chapter, go to chapter 3, start networking. Why don't you give us some of your insights on what really matters most in the early stages of the book?
Absolutely. So there's a couple things. A lot of people ask me, hey, how come you started the book with like taking stock of yourself, like taking stock as the first chapter of your book? And I have to give thanks to our friend Altaf that's actually sitting in the green room waiting to jump in here one time. I'm sure to come and chat with us. So thanks, Al, for jumping in and helping us through this thing. But what happened was I thought that you had to take stock of yourself. You had to do the old to thyself be true. And then I added family members. And then I added, the companies that you may work for. So, Rhett, you and I kind of kicked off the family thing. So I had to go back in the book that I was still writing. And it was an idea that kind of you and I talked about, that taking stock was 3 things. The Altaf piece of that conversation was about self. Do I know myself? Am I a kick down doors, guns kind of a person? Do I know how to present myself well? Do I know how to write proper English instead of just writing police reports or something like that? And do I have the soft skills necessary to go into corporate security? That was something that Al really helped me kind of through that process in my mind and put together. And then on your side, I was like, the family thing. Look, you just gave 20, 25 years of kind of your life and your career. You kind of almost, I'm not saying you took it away from your family, but they were on the ride with you, right? They were on the ride with you. So are you going to go again and put them on another 10, 15, 20-year ride? Because we all know it's not apples to apples. Going into a corporate security, it's kind of apples to oranges, and you have to talk to your family because it's going to be difficult. The learning curve is going to be high. Is your family on board with you? And I felt that was important in the conversation that I had with you. And then my good friend Greg Bowman comes in, and the first podcast, by the way, Greg, the first podcast I ever had, Mr. Bowman. So he comes in, and I remember us having a conversation about what is the culture of the company you're going to work at or you want to work at? Do you know what it is? Because Greg and I have had the pleasure, along with all of us here in this room today, have had the pleasure of working with multiple companies. And they are different cultures, different structures. You have to know which one fits you. That's the first chapter of the book. And that's what I thought that was important to start with, to take in stock of those things before you move on. You know, I always wish that everybody could just retire and go live their lives and never have to work again. That's kind of not how it works these days. But that's why taking stock was key.
Well, Carlos, you bring up some really good points. We're looking at some of the comments. The kudos are pouring in fast and furious. Scott Vetter makes the comment that literally just got off the phone with an Air Force tech sergeant, and he's recommending your book for him as he pursues that quest in corporate security. So this is the audience that you were seeking, right? I mean, this is, let's talk about who is the book geared towards? Is it the newbie who's coming into the corporate security world, somebody who's been around? What's your audience?
Well, one thing first, Scott Vetter. If you're in the military world right now and you haven't picked up Scott Vetter's book, it's also on my book. It's highlighted right here on my book, Scott Vetter. So when you get my book, get his book as well. It's going to be, I forgot exactly what page. I should have made a lot of notes on this, but Scott is awesome. He has a resume and interview book that really it's guided or geared towards the military folks. So thank you, by the way, Scott, for getting on there. Now, I have to say that I forgot your first question.
Who's it geared to, Carlos?
Who's it geared towards, Carlos? Who's your audience for this? Giving out that wisdom and those lessons learned. Who are you talking to?
Yeah, I wanted to start back, and probably something I'll start another book that'll come out later on, which is 10 years prior to anybody retiring. I wanted to start back there, but what I did, I started about 5 years. And these are for anybody in the military, law enforcement, emergency services, firefighters, EMTs, paramedics, anybody in those fields, along with the federal career folks that are retiring within the next 5, 3, or 1 year. It's really geared towards them. It gives them a roadmap on kind of how to do it, or at least how to be a little more successful in doing it. So when you're retired, you can kind of step right into a career instead of, waiting 6 months, a year, or whatever it takes to get a new job. So if that's what you're trying to do, you're transitioning right now, thinking about it, or in the process, you're already retired. Now you're just trying to find some ideas. This is the perfect book for you.
Man, that really speaks to a lot of the folks on the call. You can see the comments. So circling back, we'll end chapter 1 and transition to chapter 2 in a minute, and unless we're going to bring Althoff on. But I think what you said is going to resonate with a lot of these guys, because if you're in government in the government sector, you're still potentially deploying. You're working long hours. You're doing all kinds of stuff. In the military, your family, whether they intended to or not, they joined up when you joined up, right?
Yeah.
It's either go take a 2 or 3 year tour somewhere and leave them in Mayberry, or they're going to move with you, like mine did 17, 18 times, a couple of high schools all over the place. So when you transition, I think it's important to realize that, what did my grandpa say, Carlos? All money's not good money, right?
Right.
So talk to your wife, talk to your kids if they're in high school, right? They're not going to want another move, right, when things are going on.
Yeah.
So take stock really matters, because, if your family is going to follow you again, at least give them a voice in the decision making.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, and that was great. And it's really funny. If y'all don't mind, I like to bring Al in because, you just covered exactly kind of like the second part of that intro. But Al really has to taken stock, of who you really are in World Corporate Security. So do you guys mind if we bring him in? Can we bring him in from the green room?
We love him.
Get him in here.
Hey,
there he is.
There he is.
What's going on, buddy?
Mr. Bora, how are you, sir?
I mean, the question is, how are you, Mr. Francisco? Published author, #1 release on Amazon. I mean, look at you.
I'm on cloud 9, buddy. I'm on cloud 9. It has been really an awesome day today. Been a challenging day, but fun day. And man, I'll tell you. But what we were saying, and I wrote a lot of this stuff because of you on the conversation about taking stock of self, who you are, right, and understanding who you are. That was a piece of that book. And I think a lot of people that come from law enforcement, military, emergency services, and federal careers really has an issue sometimes with the corporate world. And I'm like, listen, you have to really think about who you are.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, I think a lot of people take for granted that, who you are is kind of imposed on you when you're in the military, and even in law enforcement to a degree. And you're talking, like I was talking about in our podcast, you're almost programmed or institutionalized when you do long periods of time in these organizations, right? And so you kind of don't really know who you are after 20 or 30 years of that. I mean, you remember who you were before you got in, but I know for me personally, I took about a year between my stint of active duty and my next job. Really kind of doing I call it like a career walkabout, right? Like just trying to figure out what that next step's going to be. I focused on me. I did a lot of jujitsu. I did a lot of surfing, traveled a lot, just because, and it's important to do that because you have this big kind of like monster on your back of who you were for the last 20 years. Right. And what you really need to be doing is kind of figuring out who you're going to be for the next 20 years. Right.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly it. And that's how that part came up, Rhett, of like, hey, the all taking kind of the account of yourself. So that's chapter 1, really just breaking down. And then Greg really breaking down the different cultures. And Greg, maybe you could talk a little bit about it. It's really about taking into account, what you think the culture of the place is going to be where you move into. So it's either whatever the company is going to be, you have to know a little bit about the background and ask a lot of questions of folks, that are kind of in the job at that time to find out what the culture is about.
Yeah, and Carlos and I have really talked in depth about this, and this was a big struggle for me, and one where Carlos, you were a phenomenal mentor and sounding board for this. Is whatever you decide to get into as you're exploring what that next chapter that Al talked about is, do the research. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about interviewing later on, but when you do get into an interview, you're asking just as many questions of them as they are of you. And I made the mistake of jumping into a role right out of my law enforcement days that I thought was the best fit, that I thought was what there was out there for me, and it really was not. And I thankfully was able to extract myself from it after a few months. It wasn't horrible, just not for me, and that was on me for not doing the research. And fortunately, I landed in the tech industry and found a phenomenal team to work with, and really began to have those conversations about what was it that I was looking for? What was I trying to get to? Where did I want to go with this next chapter? A lot of us are those type A driven personalities where we're not happy being the field marshal at the golf course for a couple of days a week. We're looking to make contributions to value add to an organization, to a company, to a team, and be productive and drive something. And that's where we want to take those experiences that we've had over the last 20 years and really put them to use in creating something, doing something, and then mentoring the next group that's coming up behind us. And that transition, those conversations with you, Carlos, Rhett, Al, really helped me kind of refine what I was looking for and figure out what that path looked like.
Well, it goes both ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that brings up an interesting subject. And since all of you are experts in the field, when you come out of a job like, Al's a snake eater, Greg, you were, a city administrator, law enforcement guy. Sometimes there's a perception from a recruiter or a company's perspective that these skills are too hard. They won't work inside of our industry, right? So, educate yourself and make that one of the talking points should you ever get at least a phone screening, right? That hey, I know a lot about tech. I know a lot about this particular company. Here's what I bring to the table, and here are the things that you may think, and let me kind of give you some info. What do any of you think about that?
Hey, Rhett, I think that's a great transition to chapter 2 for the building connections, right? I mean, is that, Carlos, kind of what your intent was for that portion of the book?
Yeah, as I was going through it and just trying to figure out, what in the world am I going to do in order to get to the folks out there that sometimes building connection is the key. I remember there was a time in my career that I used to be upset at that. I used to be like, well, it's all about who you know, wah, wah, wah. But I never realized the bigger picture of it, which was important at the time, because I knew right there and then that I was failing somewhere. So I said, how do I get folks in law enforcement, military to understand, yes, and the outside world connection is everything. So I started breaking down how to connect with people and how, more importantly, to stay connected with them. Because what I was getting even today was a lot of people that were coming to me and saying, hey, man, I'd love to connect with you and everything. I never hear from them again. Then I would get the ones that would say, hey, man, love to connect with you. Here's my resume. Get me a job. And then I used to get the ones who say, hey, man, I'd love to connect with you. Not really sure what to do, but here I am. Can you get me a job? So I said, okay, let me break down what relationships online look like. And I use LinkedIn as a great model for that, Instagram and everything else. And in that part, I literally break down step by step on how to create a relationship, a meaningful relationship that hopefully at the end will get you the gig by the time you're retired, or right now if you're already retired and looking for a new gig, but before you transition, in order to get you to the gig that you want. And kind of that's how that started on chapter 2.
And that makes so much sense. The comments are still coming in. I'm getting pinged on the side from, hey, give Carlos a big thumbs up. So back to the specifics of how do you prepare yourself for that next step, right? That's kind of heading into another chapter.
Yep. And are you trying to break down chapter 3?
Yes, I am. I'm trying to get you to break it down because you're the maestro. I put on my fancy hat.
No, but that was such a quick jump, man. I was like, man, okay, that works for me. So, really interesting, because time to learn is really about the apps that you're going to need to learn in order to get into the new world. It's about learning how to read, how to write, understand computer systems, understand what it is new to the world, like using Microsoft Word or Google Docs. I mean, all these things that these companies use in today's world that a lot of folks in the military, law enforcement, and federal jobs, a lot of them, not all, but a lot of them don't have the background to kind of figure that out and find those things out. So that's kind of what that chapter is about. And it's really taking the time to learn again. And then there's another concept behind that, which was like, hey, how do we literally go back to changing our minds to being re-educated? How do we do that? Because when you get into the corporate world, you're going to have to do that. You're going to have to be educated once again. So how do you do it? And it's coming in with an open mind, being vulnerable, being understanding that you're almost starting new again, So if you're a big 5, 6 when you retire and an officer, that you're almost starting like an 1, 2 level again, just because of that. And that's what chapter 3 is about. It's really just breaking down a little bit of things that you need to learn, little things about self and what you need to do and be prepared as you come into a whole new world.
Right. So that's what I wanted, right? Now, if you take chapters 2 and 3 together, we talk about connections, mental preparation, and reaching out. Some people don't like to ask for help, right? It exposes them. It makes them feel vulnerable. And back in the day, there was a perception that if me and Greg and Alan, we each had 2 walnuts, we're keeping those. The other chipmunks are going to come get them. We're going to hoard our skill sets. I feel in the last 5 years, for whatever reason, people like you guys are far more open to mentorship wherever it's coming from. Now, later on in the book, you talk about don't just hit it and quit it, right? Don't do a hit and run. Hey, Carlos, I saw you on LinkedIn. Can you put me in for this job? At least, date a little bit, ask a few questions. But what do you think about that, those different concepts and how they're working today with mentorship and openness?
Yeah, isn't that something? One of the things about our group of folks that are coming from the military, law enforcement, and federal careers is that we're not very good at being vulnerable. When we need help and we need something, when we need whatever it is, because we don't understand something, we're not good at doing that. And that's one of the things that in order for you to come into the corporate world, you have to be that. You have to be that person. And it's really difficult today if you're not, because you can't succeed in the corporate world. And that's one of the challenges, by the way, of a lot of people that come into the corporate world in those fields, is that they're so stuck in being a leader somewhere else that they forget that it is a restart in their lives, and they have to be vulnerable and humble and understand that you have to kind of figure out the mechanism that you're in, because it is a different one. So one of the keys here is the soft skills that you need once you come in, and which I talk about in the book as well, is the soft skills are key. Soft skills are key to trying to make that transition easier for you. And that's where a lot of the folks that are in the book fail, which is the kind of just being humble again and being kind and being open to learning.
So Carlos, that really resonates with me, because you and I spoke at length during my transition of going from the pinnacle of my former career to starting over, and very bluntly and very kindly in your former hospitality ways. We won't say the name because otherwise Rhett will have to take a shot. But you were very kind one day and made the comment and said, bro, I get where you were, but you've only been at this, a couple of years now in this industry. So you got to have some patience. And I think you and I talked about that, fake it till you make it and rely on your former skill set as it builds up. And where does that factor into what you're trying to communicate and advise people towards?
Yeah. So in the book, I talk about that. There are plenty of skills that you can bring from law enforcement, military, federal emergency service, plenty of those skills. It's being able to translate them to fit where we are. But the humble pie, I guess, that sometimes people get hit in the face with, is that all of us respect your 20, 25, 30 years of everything and anywhere you came from. But there is this understanding that you have to really focus on, is that the corporate world is different. The company that I work for today is a very open company, very different. I mean, it's perfectly okay to shed a tear while you're on a call or in a meeting or in a video if it hits you right. Here we go. To be vulnerable today, I just did that today, early today in a meeting. Whoever was in that meeting with me today, you saw that it wasn't a tear, but I definitely couldn't speak because I was being so vulnerable at the moment of the situation, and that's not very comfortable for people that come from that side. But the book, I break that down a little bit, and I make sure that, people understand that they're comfortable, and then they're making it happen, for them.
Just reading some of the comments, you got a thumbs up from an airborne trooper. Carlos, you're a great guy. One of the favorite things about the book is your positive tone and encouragement.
Hey.
I'm super proud to be associated with you. And then the last comment from Scott was soft skills and flexibility are the key today.
Absolutely. So, yeah. Thanks, Al, by the way, for jumping in and kind of listening to us and giving us your 2 cents as an awesome guest. Thanks. So, yeah, where are we now?
Let's we're talking about soft skills. We're talking about the resumes. And I think we've all been contacted enough, either through LinkedIn or through friends of friends that coming from areas where, how do those skills translate? And I use the story of I got hit up by a contact who sent me the resume, and it detailed really nicely how many doors and they kicked down and how many guns and dope and everything else, and how do you advise someone on making that transition from skill sets that can transfer but need some refinement or some different approach to the 22-year-old recruiter that they may be working with who has no idea what they're talking about?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So resumes has always been like a little bit of my pet peeve, because I get a lot of resumes. I get to interview a lot of people. And I'm like, okay, I got to help these folks that are transitioning with resumes. And at times I was getting like 7-pagers, man, 7-page resumes I've seen before. And I said, okay, I have about 15 to 20 seconds to read each one of them for some key points to pop out. And even before me, the AI to pick up that it's a good resume that fits within the job description. So I said, okay, I got to help folks in doing that. So I talked about acronyms. It was like one of my first things that I ever put out. If you look at any of my videos on the Corporate Security Translator YouTube page, you will see that's like one of the first videos I put up. It's like, hey, I don't need acronyms because I don't understand it. I don't need you to tell me that you are in charge of the 22nd Battalion so-and-so and leave it at that, because I don't even know what that means. I don't know what you were doing, and I don't know how many people you were leading, and most importantly, how many people you led to better careers, right? I wasn't getting any of that. So I said, okay, let me add that on a book of some of the important things that I needed. And I said, look, if you had a very, very long career, I don't want no more than 2 pages of your career and 1 page, the last one, of your education or certifications. If you had less than that, maybe 20 or less, 2 pages is the most. Like, I don't need any more than that, and get to the point and let's get it moving. So the book breaks down each one of those pages, how it's supposed to go, what I need from the first page, what I need from the second page, and what I need on the third page, if that's the way you're going to go. So I had to do it because I was having a lot of problems with folks just not understanding. I mean, people are literally taking all that they were ever certified in throughout their entire life, copying and pasting it onto a resume, and just sending it and saying, hey, that's my resume. Take a look at it. Let me know what you think. And man, that was tough to read. So that's kind of like chapter 4. It's really about the resume, how to break down your resume. What are some important parts about the resume? Talks about jargon. And even, by the way, setting up your voicemail on your phone. Like, don't forget to set up your voicemail on your phone. If you're emailing folks back and forth, make sure your signature in your email is right. Some people still have their email from high school. I literally had a job one time, a guy that was emailing me back and forth, and it had his name, and underneath it said, "That dude," as a signature. And I'm like, man, did you forget to at least change your signature? So I'm not going to say his name, but underneath was "that dude" in quotes.
I think that's a good transition, Carlos, as we're talking about, what does that image look like of going from maybe that former life, whatever it fell in military, law enforcement, perhaps the rigidity, the stiffness. How do you transition that to the corporate side where we don't show up to interviews in suits anymore? It's much more relaxed. We don't have offices. We have desks that the boss is sitting right next to you, and it's an open format. And to the audience, the comments are coming in. They're great. Our old friend Michelle says congratulations and good to see her on here. And so how do you help make that transition to folks, Carlos, with getting ready, learning a whole new environment, a whole new world, right?
Yeah. And how interesting is this? I'm glad you brought up Michelle, because obviously this book, I was so nervous starting this thing. And anybody that knows me, I rarely get nervous. But I want to thank, Emily, Talia, Michelle for helping me put this book together. So I did not forget you. I was not in my right mind in the beginning. That was literally as a note here as my first thing to talk about. And I did not. So anyways, thanks for that. So this is the interesting piece because, now we have recruiters out there, Greg, and recruiters do a really good job if you ask them a lot of questions because they get paid if you get the job. They get like bonuses, if you get the job. If they did a good job recruiting you and preparing you for what you needed, you do a good job. And they are always they're always open to telling you exactly what you should wear, not wear, or whatever the case may be for your interviews. They also give you questions about the interview process that are important for you to listen to. They also give you websites for you to go and research and get ready for it. I mean, recruiters are really your good friends, but talk about the different industry. This is the reason why you need to know the culture of each industry. Because if you're going to go to the banking industry, there's a good chance, yes, you're still going to interview with a suit and tie. That's just how it is. If you're going to go into the biofarm industry, it's the same way. If you're going to go into the hospitality industry, you can do it with a jacket, like a little party jacket and a button-down shirt, as I have here in the book cover. I mean, that guy right there would have interviewed for hospitality.
Nice segue.
But if you're gonna interview for tech, right? And you guys know this. If they walked into our office with a suit and tie, would say, "Oh no, that guy or that lady," because I see some ladies walking in with a suit. Like, oh, they didn't get the memo. You know, they weren't ready for the memo. And I mean, till today, everybody knows. And I'm going to bring Al back because I've seen him too. Al, I mean, we go to work in what is it? I mean, boat shorts, boat shoes, and a button-down shirt for me every single day. I mean, that's how I roll. I seen you kind of look how casual you are.
I literally go to work like this. True story. I mean, and I might even have beads and board shorts on too, just for effect. But again, though, like you mentioned, I mean, the culture is going to dictate and drive, that aspect of your work style. But I will tell you, having interviewed over the last year about 75 different candidates for different roles on my team, it does tell me if they've actually done research on the company culture and my team culture. If they're showing up with a suit or they're showing up with a tie on, I kind of already know, like, just what's the impression there. You didn't do enough research on what this team is or this company culture, right? So you're already kind of starting off behind the power curve. Yeah. And that's as a hiring manager, that's what I'm taking away from that. Like, you didn't research this company. So how bad do you really want this job? Like, how much energy did you really and effort did you really put into the research you did on my company, right?
Yeah.
So Al, I think what we're illustrating is there's a real need for the book. Carlos, throw the book up. Make sure people have a chance to see it.
The other part of the book. Oh, here we go.
There's a need for the book. And then conversely, if if this goes out there and we're on a podcast, or, if somebody's listening and they're in LinkedIn, let people know that all of the people that Carlos talks to in this book, right, are emergency management teams, military folks, law enforcement folks, professionals in the government. You have skills that took you years to craft, right? Don't just throw them out the window, but know how every situation, some of me and my closest friends have dabbled in intelligence, right? Not military intelligence, because we all know that's an oxymoron, but intelligence, right? Do your due diligence. Just because you're transitioning doesn't mean that you eliminate all the things that made you successful. This book and the people that are here and the people who we know, right, 6 degrees of separation, all of us want the best for you. And I would say 9 out of 10 of you are going to probably think you want to keep going forward. But it's just as hard to not make that choice and stay where you are and get yourself ready as it is to make that choice and then having to feel desperate and get caught up in all those different situations. I'll take a drink and take your comments offline.
But, you say that, and then this is what happens. So people go to the interview, they get the interview and stuff. And so when I was writing this book, I was like, okay, we got the interview. We got the resume part of the way out of the way. So let's talk about the interview process. And I was trying to figure out the interview process. I mean, they're all different at different companies. You never know which kind of interview you're going to get. And every single one of them are different. So I kind of focused a lot on what the future looks like with the STAR method. I break down the STAR method in the book. I break down the different interview levels and steps that you have to go through in the book that I thought was important. You're going to find that a lot on chapter 5 and into chapter 6, which is negotiation. And there are things that I learned about negotiation that a lot of law enforcement military folks don't know, because you don't get to negotiate your next contract. You don't get to negotiate your next level if you're going from a corporal to a sergeant. Like, you don't get to negotiate any of those things. And so I'm like, okay, I have to talk a little bit about negotiation, because that happens in the corporate world and how to make it happen. So literally that entire kind of couple of chapters there, as we move towards the center of the book, It's resumes, interviews, and negotiations were big keys that a lot of folks in the military, law enforcement, emergency management, emergency services, and federal career they just don't know. They're unaware that it exists. So yeah.
Yeah, I think chapter 5, if you're interviewing right now, or you're in the process of interviewing and you don't read chapter 5, you are doing yourself a big disservice, because when I was transitioning, if I had just chapter 5, it would have been the book would have been worth it to me, just having that, and how to structure an interview and answer the questions and use the STAR method. I mean, STAR method is universal even in tech right now. I mean, we're always evaluating people on the STAR method. So you calling it out there in the book, Carlos, is amazing. So anyone out there who's, like, if you just buy the book for chapter 5, I think you're getting your money's worth just for that.
I like it. Yeah. So that's that. So that's kind of like those middle chapters into kind of chapter 7, which, then I started saying, so it's almost like a timeline if you go in the book. And I think, Rhett, you mentioned this. You don't have to really start from the beginning to the end. You could pick at a place where you are right now in your job of finding, period in time. And then you can say, okay, I just want to start right here at the negotiation, or I want to start at the resume, or I want to start at the interview. And then I said, okay, well, you got the job. What are you going to do now? And so I said, all right, what do first 90 days look like in your career? And that's kind of like how we start moving forward in the book.
So that's what excited me about chapter 7, right? I think a lot of people just kept their head down for the last 4, 5, 6 years, right? They're just they're stable. They got kids in college. How many braces can you buy? There's so many different things that are going into, house prices on the West Coast are skyrocketing. I've got to tell you, times like this make what we do worthwhile, right? And the culture that you talk about, and the what are you going to do once you get inside the door, right? Adjusting to a new culture. You guys have all read it. What are your takeaways? Because I know what mine are, and I'll play cleanup. Greg?
So for me, coming out of law enforcement, where we had our language, we had our culture, we had our norms, what was the accepted behavior? And I'll put it out there for those that have served in various capacities. Dark humor was a very big part of that culture. Yeah. Hey, Carlos laughing. He and I have talked, about this. Getting into an environment where things are much more sensitive, they're more touchy-feely, they're more open in communications, and things aren't so isolated. So, Carlos, I think you did a really good job of highlighting some of those challenges. Somebody coming from a more rigid, policy-driven, public perception, public image, public view perception or viewpoint may be seen as they come into something that we're in t-shirts and shorts and boat shoes wearing into the office every day, and that's perfectly fine. So where do you see those high points for those folks making that transition into an environment that's uniform, squared away, dress right dress, to I'm wearing a t-shirt and shorts in today and feeling pretty good about this?
So I started just seek to understand. Spend a lot of your first 90 days just seeking to understand. One of the great things as I kind of moved up in leadership at my prior company, here we go, Rhett, pick up your glass because I know it's a shot on this one. My prior company, Disney, and I know Ricky is on a call, but I mean, he was one of my leaders at Disney, incredible leader, by the way, and he has a piece on the book as well. Thanks, Ricky, for that. You know how much I love you. But it was like, dude, take a deep breath and seek to understand. Figure where you are, and so in the book, I talk a lot about paying attention to how meetings start, how they end, how people walk, how they talk, how your company moves, their acronyms, not your acronyms, their acronyms, which I know, Greg, you and I broke that down in our first podcast. Coming in, I was like, what is this? Oh God, I got to write this down. You had homework when you were going home, But it was like seek to understand was the first part. And then it's trying to understand the corporate culture, like who's in charge, who's not in charge, who owns a program, who doesn't own the program, who knows stuff more than you do, who doesn't, because that's what happens. Understanding budgets, something that a lot of law enforcement folks don't or military folks don't really play around with too much, right? Breaking down budgets. So I kind of break that down and I talk about those things, talking about how in the world today there's more flatter organizations than kind of what you see when you come from law enforcement. So I break down a lot of those things. Being a culture shifter, you're almost going to have to learn. It's not like fake it till you make it. In this chapter, I break down being a culture shifter. You almost have to shift a little bit how you walk and talk as you start molding yourself into the culture. That's broken down in the book. Being that chameleon, embrace the chameleon in you, is breaking down in the book. So there's a lot of great stuff in chapter 7 that I think folks that are coming from that law enforcement, military, emergency service, and federal careers will take a lot out of, and hopefully it'll make them just a little more comfortable within their own skin as they're transitioning their minds, their hearts, and everything into this corporate world.
Man, that's some great stuff, Carlos. So one of the things that I know we've talked about over the last couple of years is, so you got in the door, right? It's different, but the expectations are high, right? You're generally brought on across the spectrum. All the comments on the chat are continuing to come. Hey, you guys are speaking right into my wheelhouse, so thanks for the comments and buy the book. But the expectations are they're hiring you because they think you know what you're doing. So don't be afraid to do a good job, but you don't necessarily need to go in with a Sherman tank, right, and flatten the place. I think listen, observe, take some keys from your partners. Again, being vulnerable. It's okay to ask Greg, hey, Greg, I was just in the meeting and I think I got the gist, but man, what was he talking about, right? Because they're not going to, I mean, they may bust you out a little bit and call you the new guy, but the fraternity that we are in is so positive and has made such a different impact, I know, on my life and that of my family. So I would encourage people, go in with a high standard, but it's okay to ask questions. Keep your boss informed, right? Don't tell me 2 days before the project's due that you don't have a clue, right? You have that conversation a couple of days out. Say, hey, I put some thoughts together. Can you look at this outline? You guys have all been there. What do you think?
Yeah, I'll leave the floor for somebody else because, I'll talk forever. But I know that, both everybody on this call has helped me through either the mental process or a lot of listening to me in this. But what do you guys think what Rhett said too? And I'm sure I'll find it in the book somewhere.
100% agree. I think you have to understand that it's part of the transition, right? Like you were hired to solve a problem, right? And they want you. The company wants you to win. They want you to solve the problem well, and they want you to save them money. And so you need to be conscious of that. You need to understand that that might require you, because it's a new problem, to ask questions that and understand too, like your law enforcement military guys, like we train consistently for years and years for specific problems. That's how those industries are structured. So you actually know how to solve the problem when you show up on that call for service, or when you're out there executing an operation as a military guy, right? You already know how to do it because you've trained for it so many times. You kind of have to remember you're back in boot camp again, and you're learning how to do a movement for the first time again, or you're learning how to do something for the first time. And if you don't approach it in that way, you're not going to ask questions, right? And you're going to have that fear that Rhett was talking about, and you're going to set yourself up for some short-term failure, which isn't good, right? You don't want that to be your first impression. You want to be known as the person who's going to ask questions, get things done, and still execute at a high level and a high, produce a high product that they expect from you. That's why they hired you. But if you're too your head is too big that I have 30 years or 20 years of doing X and X before you got through the door, and I'm not going to ask questions because I know everything, that's probably the wrong attitude to have.
Well, and Carlos called it out very well in chapter 7 in a conversation that he and I'd had about my first, 3-4 weeks at our current employer. And, we'd go into meetings and the banter, the jargon, the terminology, the acronyms would be flying back and forth. And I'd just kind of sit and smile, and I had my notepad and I'd just write everything down. Sounds good. Sounds great. And then after the meeting, as we're walking away, Carlos, what does any of this mean? Or anybody help? Well, I have no idea what this means. So, for me, it was remembering that I'm learning something new, that I don't know what I don't know, and being able to ask for help and resources and say, hey, I need some help here. Can somebody point me in the right direction?
So before Carlos jumps in, because I know he's gonna, for those of you that don't know Carlos, he is a consummate leader, manager, pro. He doesn't look for credit. He looks for ways to set his team up, or the other team, right? Doesn't even need to be his team. And the way that we collaborate inside of these different organizations, and I see the comments, continuing to pop up, Fred and Scotty and fantastic comments. But what I learned was it doesn't necessarily need to be done Carlos's way or Altof's way or Greg's way. They just want it done so the team, can come to some consensus. Because unlike the military, where there is a very strict protocol and chain of command, and your watch commanders and in the law enforcement sector, most of the tech companies have this amoeba-like, group think, not necessarily group think, but a consensus of, let's talk it out. That they get more things done by let's talking it out than they do by everybody going into their neutral corners and then coming up with different ideas.
Alignment is key. Like that's tech. Right? Everything has to be aligned. We want alignment. That's more important than a decision. We want alignment.
It's funny that you say all that. And I thank you for saying those kinds of things, Rhett. But I'm going to read page 2. I couldn't get it any further up on the pages in the book. And I know there's a lot of people listening and probably going to see it later on. And I know there's some people in the chat that probably want to hear this. Page 2. I give you this information from the bottom of my heart and with respect to all men and women who protect me, my family, and my loved ones globally and here at home. I wrote this book as a small repayment to all of the great military, law enforcement, and federal folks I've had the opportunity to have as my leaders, and who, with open hands and hearts, gave me all their knowledge in return. I hope you receive as much joy out of this book as I did while writing it. Thank you. So I'm only a great leader because of a lot of folks, by the way, that are here, that are listening, folks that I worked with and had the partnership to learn from, and the patience, the humbleness, and the vulnerability to learn from. And a lot of folks have supported me on that. So I appreciate everybody, which then allowed me to kind of be a decent leader and then, kind of write this kind of book. But ultimately, the book actually goes back to that, about, again, humbleness and all these other things. And I don't want to skip into chapter 8, but I think this is a great one for chapter 8, because chapter 8 talks about ranks, relationships, and sharing. There's no ranks really in our world, the corporate world. I mean, we all know who the boss is, but it's not like, people don't walk around with brass on themselves or, chevrons, so on and so forth. So the good thing about this book is that I break those things down to ease people into it so they understand that that's how it works. I even talk about how relationships are in. People in the military, law enforcement, federal careers don't want to be friends with anybody else on Facebook, LinkedIn, you name it. They're like, I'm not going to be friends. But that is the norm. That's the norm in our world. We are all in those fields. I mean, that's just how it works every single day, right? So you're like, oh, well, that's kind of like, I'm not quite sure I can do that, but it's the way it works today. So I kind of break that down. But then I go even further. Once you get that figured out, I think one of the key points that everybody, that once they come in, that they need to think about is like, hey, how do I create a mentor and a friend within this corporation that can help me through the process of learning while I'm here. Make my stay in this corporate hotel a lot nicer and easier than anything else. And I kind of break that in the book, which is kind of a lot of fun. I do internal politics of the corporate world in that chapter. That's a real fun chapter, chapter 8, that talks about ranks, relationships, and sharing. So yeah, good stuff there.
Man, that is awesome, Carlos. So again, I don't have a hard stop. We can keep running this party all night. I got plenty of iced tea. But I know that you wanted me to talk about the differences that any job can make to somebody, and your desire to help people get that right answer. So if anybody's got any comments, don't hesitate to put them on the chat here now. I know Greg, Al, myself, Carlos, we're on LinkedIn. We're in a couple of different theaters or environments. But Carlos, what do you think, man? Did you want to talk about anything?
I mean, I could keep on going forever and ever. I actually told my wife and Jax that this might take a little bit longer. Then, if people have to drop, I totally understand. I just wanted to get through it so we can and we're almost there. We're in chapter 9, as I'm seeing it, which is, what if you are the leader? So I get a lot of questions asked about, hey, Carlos, you're not going to believe this. I got a position as a director of a major company. What should I do? First, I'm clapping. I'm like, hey, congratulations, came straight out of military law enforcement. You're able to get an amazing rank. So chapter 9 was for them. And I talk about the buddy play, the I am the greatest play, the gaslight play, the empire me play, and the smart play. I break down 5 leadership principles that anybody that's coming in that I've seen in my career, what they do. And I said, look, you can pick any of these 5. It's totally up to you. And let me tell you how it's probably going to end up dependent on each one of these plays. And that's chapter 9, where I talk about, hey, you should think about some things. And if anybody ever been around me, I talk about the story of the island. If as a leader, you've never been to the island, it becomes very difficult to get to that island because the ocean is vast. You may get there one day, but it might take you a long time. So let's say you get that leader position. Why not hire folks, that been to the island before and can take you there a lot faster? Instead of one of the plays that I have here is the gaslight play or the empire play. The empire play is like, I'm going to hire somebody that knows a lot less than me and I'll tell them what to do. And I'm like, but that's not the person that's been to the island that can get you there. That's why you got to be humble and vulnerable and be the leader that allows those people to take you there. And then you give them credit for it. Give them credit for it, man. That's what you should be doing. So we all probably seen all these plays that I talk about on chapter 9, which is pretty interesting.
Carlos, I think it's interesting because a lot of people default to, Al asked me a question, and my default to Al is, well, hey, Al, that's a great question. What would you do? But Al knows what he would do. He genuinely wants you to think and tell him how you would handle it. And then you've got to have, you're opening yourself up. Somebody may tell you, Greg may take me aside and say, hey, I know you're passionate about this. Have you thought about 1, 2, and 3, right? Have you thought about the unintended consequences? And the other thing I wanted to point out, what you guys were talking about earlier, people are not used to being vulnerable in these law enforcement military communities, right? Vulnerability equals potential risk to my team. People don't like to be vulnerable. So it's going to take some time for you to leave that Kevlar at home, right? Leave the body armor at home, come into your new job and just embrace it. Carlos?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I hope that ultimately, Rhett, this book would just teach maybe a little bit of patience. Maybe it'll break down a little bit of humbleness. And like, if you're going to take everything out of this, soft skills, the ability to interact with people that are going to be very different than you. They don't eat, drink, and go. It's not your squad, from when you were a cop. It's not your platoon. If you go bigger, into, I'm going to go into Al here. You can't be the entire first MEF. You know what I mean? Like these are not going to be your first Marine Expeditionary Force folks. It's not an entire force. Everybody don't think alike. That's why you got to be humble. You got to be kind. You got to understand other people's way of living and everything else, because it is different. It's not, the corporate world is just a different animal. So, I hope that people get a lot of that from this. They take a deep breath. Okay, I know what I'm getting into. I got it. This book is going to help me get there. Let's do it. And everybody here in this room and anybody listening knows that I don't care if people call me. You can find me on LinkedIn any day, and I'm perfectly fine in helping you out. I make no money off of this. With the book, I make like 25 cents. But anyways, as a whole, I give a lot of my time. Everybody knows that, to just give back to the community. So if there's a lot of things that I can do off of that, it's to kind of get you there. But the interesting piece, though, about this too, is that if you continue forward in the book, I started thinking, okay, so I gave them the kind of like, all right, what do you think this is going to be like when you transition? But there are a lot of things that we all know that military, law enforcement, emergency services folks, and federal folks probably didn't touch in their career. So that's when I started to just get to the basics. By the way, this is very basics on things that you need to think about, which is kind of chapter 10, which is the basics of like corporate physical security. And that's when I start breaking down, and I have here in front of me, which was awesome. This was something I've had for a very, very long time. There's a good chance that a lot of people have seen this, and I'm going to speak really fast now because I got this thing almost memorized by now. Standards of build, policies and procedures, guidelines, post orders, guard force contract relationship, and co-employment relationships, right? How to deal with budgets, how to deal with internal, external issues, how to deal with HR, how to deal with corporate and legal and all these other things. I did an entire list of like, hey, this is an intro to what you need to think about. And that's chapter 10, just to give everybody a little bit of an idea, because I want you to succeed when you interview. When you interview, I want you to get in with a guy like me that's going to interview you and ask you about those processes and know a little bit about it. When I ask you about camera systems, intrusion detection systems, the software, the hardware, fence line security systems, you know about it. Lighting systems, you know about it. So I added that in the book as well.
And those are great points. So take us down, put the book up. Let's make sure we sell this thing tonight. Chapters 11 and 12 really talk about a lot of really dynamic things, right? They go on about reputational risks and things that you should know, standards. I think it's important that every candidate have the ability to do exactly what you just said, to have a dialogue, to be a security professional, right? All those of us that have worked with contract guard forces, almost to a T, the hundreds of professionals that I've worked with, we're not talking about posts. We're not talking about hours. We're not talking about a substandard class of worker bees, right? We all go in there with the same goals and aspirations. We partner with our contract guard force members, with our vendors, with people that are on our site, because at the end of the day, we either all succeed or we all fail together. And I think that's a great thing that you brought out in the book. Greg, Al, what do you think?
Yeah, totally. I mean, this is stuff that most people coming out of the military, out of law enforcement, may not have had exposure to. They've never had to deal with. Everything is controlled by rules, regulations, policy, MOUs with the police union, or et cetera. So these areas that really touch on a security professional's existence need to be examined. They need to be brought out. And, I'm still learning. I'm 4 or 5 years into this now. I'm still figuring things out. And it's thanks to the phenomenal community that I have through work, through all of you folks with LinkedIn, that being able to explore and learn. And this book gives that high level flyby of, these are the things that you probably should be paying attention to to be able to know where you need to focus, and it highlights, what you don't know.
Very true, brother. Al, you had something?
Yeah, totally agree with what Greg said. I mean, I think, I would say like my first corporate security role, I can tell you chapter 10, I wish I had it as well. Like I mentioned some of the other chapters. I mean, it was a steep learning curve for me when I got really deep into physical security and realizing that it's not just sitting a guard post, or not sitting duty on the weekend at Camp Hamilton, right? Is a little bit more involved than handing a Lance Corporal, a magazine and saying, hey, let's just go walk the perimeter and make sure nobody's passed out drunk in the parking lot, right? A little bit more to it, and the company it wants a little bit more out of you than just that. And so I think if you're transitioning from the military specifically, understand that the way things are done obviously are going to be much different. But I think chapter 10, 11, and 12 really give you a framework to build off of. And you can, and the great thing about how you break this stuff down is it's not something that like law enforcement or military guys would be unfamiliar with, but it frames it in a way and organizes it in a way that you can use your existing knowledge that you already have, that you had from being in the streets as a cop or on deployment or just sitting guard duty on the weekend as a military guy. And you can build off of it, right? You do a great framework there, take your existing knowledge, build off it. If you have gaps there, like IDS systems, I know I wasn't really familiar with IDS systems. I go on YouTube and, I figure out, look at, some of the IDF stuff, or I call Carlos or Greg and say, hey, get me smart on this. I got an interview next week. What do I need to know? Right. So I think it's great that you call this stuff out and, you allow people to understand, like, these are the things that you should probably know if you want to be a security professional. And if you don't know it, it's a great time to start researching it.
And I want to, from our audience, we're still getting comments, the questions. Our buddy Eric Creedy puts a plug in. He's the co-chair of the As Is Military Liaison Community and wants to, present this to their group and remind that, this isn't applicable just to the folks here in North America. This is, Carlos, a broader audience than that, right? I mean, this goes to our brothers and sisters globally, right?
Yeah.
Oh, before Carlos jumps in,
Yeah.
He's going to narrate this book. This book is going to be in English. This book is going to be in Portuguese. This book is going to be in, Carlos, tell him, man.
Hey, so, we are working with the publisher. By the way, the publisher is How to Conquer, which, just an amazing amount of folks that went into doing this book. But yes, the goal also is to work with a couple of great folks. A lot of people know that I was born in Brazil, so, it is what it is. But there's some great folks out there, once again, that helped me kind of put this thing together. But yeah, hopefully it'll be in Portuguese and everything else. But yes, throughout the world you can use this, how you approach it. I just did a bunch of presentations in Brazil with the military in Brazil, which went great. There were some nuances that were different, but the book still works really well. And so I'm really excited. In the book itself, if you guys go all the way in the back and you're able to get this book, there is a bunch of How to Conquer. If you go to the How to Conquer website, there's one of these guys here. That there's more. There's my resume is back there. There's a bunch of more information back there that you can use, and different types of forms, different types of anything. It's in the back of the book. We got a lot of insights from a lot of folks like Scott, Coach Wolford is on there. So John, Rich, Rhett, everybody that's on this call here today, more insight. There's some wrap-up resources on the book as well. There's even my top 25 tips that are in the book that are super easy to read out in the back. A lot of great stuff in it. I hope everybody picks up. And thank you, I guess. Thank you for every single person that gave me some insight, that stood by me, my family, friends. I'm going to keep it really open. Family, friends, team members, people that mentored me throughout my career. I saw Justin Wilkins pop up on the chat, and Justin Wilkins is a hell of a police officer in Central Florida. One of my past partners back in Seminole County, Florida, an incredible human being. So a lot of great folks that I talk about very positively today. Thank you very much for everything. And this book is really just a testament to a lot of great leadership that I've had from the military, law enforcement. Ricky Ricks was up there, one of the great leaders that I've ever had in my life. Yesterday, I did a presentation. Ty Lagerberg, which is an old, you ready to drink again, Rhett, Disney leader that I had on a presentation I did with Security Magazine. I mean, a lot of great folks that were doing some amazing stuff that led me to kind of putting this together. So I could probably thank the entire world. There's a lot of names, but last, and most importantly, my family. There's a lot of things going on in the world today, a lot of things going on in my life, personal, that, everything from masters, finishing up. Congratulations to me and my family for finishing up my masters and doing this and working and writing a book and doing corporate security magic and doing a bunch of other things. So my family, Joanna, little Jax, and everybody else around me that's had to put up with a little bit of my shorter fuse in the past year. Thank you very much. And you, the tree of yous, for being in my life and helping me out through this process. So I'll let you guys close it out, and I'll just be sitting here.
Nope, you got the last word. Carlos, you're the man. Thanks a lot, brother.
All right.
Thank you for allowing us to be here and be a part of this, man. We appreciate it.
All right. I think we're going to just put the book up, man. And thank you, everyone, for coming out. And you can add the QR code goes right to the book. So great to have everybody. We'll see you. Find me on LinkedIn. Let's chat. Let's talk. Thank you, everyone, to being on a call. Take care. All right. Bye-bye.